Hey, good morning, everybody. I feel like it's a little bit like church because there's so many of you that are in the back and there's all these fun spots way up front. But thanks for being here. My name is Cecile Bador, and I serve as the Chief Real Estate Officer for Twin Cities Habitat for Humanity, and I am the board chair of Minnesota Housing Partnership. And on behalf of the entire board and the staff, I want to welcome you to Election Reflection. And I'm sure we all have lots of reflections about the election. So it's really great. So this morning, I have to put on my glasses here. So we're going to kick off our time together with an overview from Elizabeth Glidden, who is our Deputy Executive Director, a legislative update, and talk a little bit about our policy framework. And then we'll invite our guests up, our panelists, Amy Koch and Abu Amara, that Ann will introduce more fully. And then we're really happy that Commissioner Jennifer Ho is here as well to provide a couple of comments as well in her reflections. So we have a lot to talk about today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ann, I guess, first, because I'm really good at this.
Thank you so much, Cecile. Good morning. How are we all doing? Okay, that's what we're expecting. Okay, woo! So my name is Ann Mavity. I'm the Executive Director of Minnesota Housing Partnership, and I am just so delighted that all of you have chosen to take your time to come with us today and try to understand what just happened. Yesterday morning, I woke up after not so much sleep, because maybe like many of you, I was up late watching the returns, but I have to walk my dog. She doesn't care, right, that the election just happened. So I'm walking around the lake. And was anyone else out walking yesterday? The fog was just incredible. And I'm walking and I can see maybe 20 feet into the lake. And I'm like, wow, even the weather got the memo, right? Like, we're all in a bit of a fog right now about what happened and what does it all mean. And so hopefully, again, today we're going to break that down a little bit with our wonderful guests. So as many of you know, Minnesota Housing Partnership, we work in 3 areas to drive equitable housing policy. We do research to help drive data-driven housing solutions. And then we work with all of you and more to help develop policy and drive policy solutions, particularly at the state level, but also with our federal delegation as well. And work, half our staff is actually working out in rural communities and with Native nations in Minnesota and across the country where they don't have that expertise on staff to solve their housing challenges. So we lend that expertise to help develop and create housing. So I always say we need more housing of every type in every corner of the state. And that's not me saying it, that's the data. That's true in Minnesota, it's true across the country. And of course, part of what MHP does is make sure that those solutions are targeting to where the market's not working, right? So the folks, the hardest working folks that nevertheless cannot even afford a basic 2-bedroom apartment. So so that's the work together we're involved in, and everything that just happened this week is going to impact how we move forward together, and so I'm excited about the conversation we're going to have. I want to say a couple thank yous before I introduce our Minnesota State Housing Finance Agency Commissioner. First, a huge thank you to our MHP board members. They are giving their time and their expertise and their influence and their contributions to make all of this work happen. So there's many of you here in the room and others online as well. And I just want to thank you so much for everything you do. I want to thank our contributors, both philanthropic contributors, industry partners who are working every day to create housing, and individuals who care about this work. I just want to thank you. All this work we do together can't happen without our collective contributions to making it happen together. And then I would like to thank our, are we on? Okay, hang on. Can you hear me now? I would like to thank our advocacy contributors. Show of hands, anyone has ever written a letter, talked to an elected official, gone over to the Capitol? Okay, look at those hands going up. And if your hand didn't go up, talk to us and we'll help you figure out how to do that. Because that is how together we collectively make sure housing remains a priority for the state and for state investments and policy solutions. And then finally, I just wanted to thank the MHP staff. I am so fortunate that every single day I get to work with the most talented, smart, dedicated team. So round of applause for our staff as well who make this happen and everything else. Thank you. So, so with that, I would love to introduce Jennifer Ho up here for some remarks. Is Jennifer in the room? There we are. Okay, I knew you were there. Jennifer Ho was appointed the State Housing Commissioner under Governor Walz. It is now in the second term, 6 years into the job, and has been leading this work on behalf of the state, and we so much appreciate your coming today and sharing insights. Tell us what just happened, Jen.
That's right. I was just thinking about all the times I've been in this room, and I was thinking about when, is that live?
Yeah, you can use that.
I was thinking about when George Stone hosted a supportive housing revival. I remember walking barefoot up the center aisle, dressed in white, to give a revival speech on the importance of supportive housing. That must have been like 15 or 20 years ago. It was amazing. I feel, brothers and sisters, like maybe today. I don't know that I can offer an election reflection at this point in time. I think I need more time to think. But as I thought about what I would offer today, I think it goes down to what's always been at my core belief, which is that housing is absolutely a bipartisan or maybe even a nonpartisan issue. It turns out we all need a home that we can afford. And I think that what was really clear during the campaigns that we witnessed is that housing is such a big issue for everyday working families. The cost of housing has become a national electoral issue. And so how do we seize that moment? Nobody wants a house they can't afford. Anybody? Right? I mean, in every room I've been in since I've taken this job, I think one person raised their hand, but I think they misheard the question. So, I mean, I think the moral of the story is that America is deeply divided, but there's common ground in housing. With housing, we agree on many things, right? We need more of it. We need it in every single community. When I gather with my peers nationally, housing isn't a red issue, it's not a blue issue, it's an everyone, everywhere issue. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about supportive housing for people experiencing homelessness, whether we're talking about the health of the rental housing market, and whether we're talking about home ownership. We need more of it, and we know what to do. And one year's election results doesn't change that fundamental fact. I've come to understand this job as being one of perpetual change in terms of the political landscape that I operate in. When I showed up in 2019, I think the federal government was shut down, if I remember right. And here in Minnesota, I was working with a Republican Senate and a DFL House. For the last 2 years, we've had the trifecta. And if the projections hold true, and I can't wait to hear what the panel has to say about this, we're going to go back to 1979, just like all the fashion seems to be doing right now. And I was 14 years old when we had a split house. And it's been really interesting to hear the news reprise the stories of what happened then. But I think the thing that's important to realize is that the legislators figured it out. They figured out how to co-govern. And so we're at that moment again today. And I did have a chance to hear from the governor's chief of staff yesterday. And he just said, this is just the next chapter of the reality of what it means to govern here. You know, we've governed in so many different, I mean, if you take the decade that was 2020 and 2021, right? Governance during that period of time, the endless legislative session, right? I mean, we have been through so many different iterations of this. And so I think what's important for us, the housers, is that we remember that the issue, the need, the reason, the benefit of what we're fighting for hasn't changed. I just want to offer a couple things. One is that 2025 is going to be a year where if you still have a pencil, you need to sharpen it. The session is going to be different. It's not 2023. And I think it's still taking a while for folks to get used to that. It's just a different economic environment. But I think that we can be assured that many of our elected officials understand that housing is a top shelf issue. And for those that are new, or for those who haven't figured it out yet, we need to be ready to do Housing 101. We can't walk in there assuming that everybody understands how this all fits. I think we need to imagine bipartisan solutions. We need to have answers that cover all the geography of the great state of Minnesota. We need to have answers that balance metro and rural needs. And we need to have understand how to balance what's critical for housers right now and what's critical for people who need housing. I think that it's just really, really important that we figure out how to lift up the need to do more while dealing with the challenges that the industry faces. And then also for the first time, it might be possible that we're playing defense for the first time in a long time. There have been talks around the need for budget cuts, and we haven't been in a political environment like that for a very long time. And so with a changed political landscape, I think we need to be ready to respond to different perspectives and different approaches to the budget. I'm looking forward to the November forecast. I'm hopeful about the November forecast, but I also know that costs are rising everywhere. Even as we were able to deploy the funding from the 2023 legislative session, we didn't find that we were doing 3 times more selections. We were finding we were doing selections at projects that just cost a lot more. And there's nothing that suggests that that's dramatically shifting or that we're going back the same way that I think people wait for going back to a 2.75, 3.25 interest rate environment in single family. And I'm not certain that we're going back to that anytime soon. So I think the challenge for us is to realize that we are the holders of one of the most important issues of our time. The dream of home ownership is feeling out of reach for a whole generation of people. And if they, they can't even afford to rent, let alone think about the possibility of buying a house. And so our job is to hold that and to figure out how to hold that together so that we enter a legislature where the balance of power is a vote, or maybe not even that, to find bipartisan solutions to make sure that we get Minnesota the housing market that works for everyone. So we're in busy season right now at Minnesota Housing. Can't talk to most of you because we're in the middle of multifamily selections. It's the first thing they teach you as commissioner, just this time of year, just say to people, hi. But I just want to say, nothing changed this week. We need more housing, a lot more housing at prices that people can afford. And so how we figure out how to carry that message to the Hill is going to be a defining moment for us as a movement. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Glidden, and I'm MHP's Deputy Executive Director, and I'm excited to be here with you today. I want to be, I think, the first person to say welcome not only to this big room full of people, but this is the first event that we've done as a larger hybrid, and so we also have a big online audience, many of whom are from Greater Minnesota, and I just want to say welcome to all of you as well. Is there something? Okay, so not a problem. I can do it, I think. Then we can just go ahead without that. Okay? You don't mind standing, I'll fix it. Okay. All right. So just as we get going here, I will say I am really excited for the conversation from Amy and Abu. You're going to get introduced to them in just a moment because there's lots I feel that we're still trying to understand in Minnesota. But one thing I do know is that not only was housing a top issue in the presidential race, it was an issue throughout conversations all throughout Minnesota, up and down the ticket. And when lawmakers hear about issues on the doors, we know that it's going to translate into important conversations at the Capitol and as part of the legislative session. So we are getting prepared for that. At MHP, our agenda has included for many years a focus on maintaining, saving, and creating more homes that Minnesotans can afford. We have a framework for our work, but this has really been part of MHP's bread and butter issues. And we're going to share just a few highlights from our agenda, things that we know will be on there, but we will release our full legislative agenda closer to the legislative session. So yeah, you can stay right there, move forward. So the first thing I wanted to mention is one we don't have a specific slide on, is that we are going to be advancing the work of the Minnesota Housing Stability Coalition. The economic pressures on affordable homes are just tremendous right now, with negative impacts on residents of those homes and on owners as well. We're going to be supporting solutions that build the capacity of nonprofit affordable housing providers and developers to continue to create more affordable homes. The second campaign I wanted to emphasize to you is one that we have been a leader in. It's the Our Future Starts at Home Coalition. This is continuing the work that MHP has been leading on for many, many years, trying to identify dedicated, predictable funding to support housing solutions. Because all Minnesotans, no matter what we look like or where we come from, belong in safe and stable places to call home that we can afford. Move back for 1 second. And this is a coalition that has over 70 coalition members. And it is a new approach. It is a constitutional amendment that would raise the sales tax by 0.3% and dedicate that revenue to homeownership opportunity, rental opportunity, and housing stability. And importantly, it also would include funding that is dedicated annually to rental assistance, which we see as a critical solution. And finally, we wanted to highlight our work in the Abundant Housing Supply Coalition. So this is a group of leaders that has been working on statewide zoning reform opportunities. We know that Minnesota's land use and zoning policies are dated. They have been contributing to today's housing disparities, and they've been adding cost and time to housing projects in a way that has been harming our ability as a state to thrive and for families to get economically ahead. So we will be continuing to work on solutions. These are common sense reforms, and we're working with a big tent coalition on approaches that will bring success this year. And so with that, I'm turning things over to Anne to introduce our speakers.
Thank you. We're going to do just a little, we're going to move this to the side, and we're going to be standing so all of you can see us really well as we are talking. And I'd like to invite our speakers to come on up. We have mics that are on that table that just moved away. And can you put this in the middle too? Yes, perfect. And so we have two amazing speakers. You may have seen them already on Almanac or on your local news on election night. These folks have a lot to say and have years and years of insight into politics and what happened, in particular at the state level. So Abu Amara is sort of the Democratic side of our conversation today, worked for the Speaker of the House for years. And again, if you've seen him on TV, on Almanac, on CNN, I believe, and all around town. And Abu is an attorney in town right now and helps inform all kinds of clients along the political continuum. And then Amy Koch, who is with Momentum Advocacy, is the former Republican Speaker of the House in the state Senate, and brings, again, decades of experience with the Republican side of the aisle, but really about just making things happen at the legislature. And so I am so delighted to have each of you. And I think we wanted to start our conversation really with sort of some general insights of what are these big trends that came out of the what just happened? For all of you, I think we're going to talk a little bit about sort of the national piece, just for a couple minutes, about what happened nationally, and then bring that down to what happened in Minnesota and spend most of our time there as well. So what just happened? Amy, we'll start with you.
Great. Well,
in those trends.
In a nutshell. Let's see, is this on? There we go. All right. Good morning, all, and thank you so much for having me. Thanks, Ann. Thanks, Elizabeth. Appreciate you and appreciate all of you showing up. I have the unenviable task as the Republican in the room to explain what happened. And so a couple things. I want to let you know that what I say comes from a place of love. I am not looking to spike the football. When I say some things today that might be harder to hear, it is not because I'm like, ha, 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 I told you so. If you watch me, I did tell you so, but, but also
not really. We'll
because I want to try to break it down for you so that because I need everyone to kind of understand what happened, because I know I have a lot of Democrat friends that I was reaching out to in the last couple days, sort of trying to talk off the ledge, honestly, and explain to them that this big trend that you saw isn't everything. It isn't everything that they sort of fear and worry about, coming from, what just happened on a federal level. So what did just happen? Obviously, former President Donald Trump was reelected. He was reelected. I think he's going to end up with, 312 electoral votes. They haven't finalized Arizona and Nevada yet, but those are absolutely going to go his way. So it's a resounding electoral college victory. But additionally, he's likely to win the popular vote, which has not been something that's happened in a while. Biden obviously won the popular vote and the electoral college, but previous to that, the Republican president, he did not, Trump didn't in 2016. Senate, U.S. Senate flipped. Obviously, there'll be 52 Republican senators. And then the U.S. House, still not decided. I think last I looked, there was 40-some races that hadn't sort of cycled out. I did talk to Emmer's folks yesterday. They believe the Republicans will hold the House, but it'll be a really close margin. They gave me a number around 222. Don't hold me or them to that, but that's what.
And you need 218 to have the majority in the House.
Yeah, I'm sorry, that's a good point. Yep, so they'll be 218 for majority, they're looking at 222. So it is likely that we're going to now have a trifecta at the federal level of Republicans, and have not had that since the first time that Trump was elected in 2016. And at that time, of course, you remember, we really fought each other, right? Mitch McConnell in the Senate and the president at the time were not good friends in the least. I think the Republican Party has become more unified under Trump for Trump's agenda, and so I don't think you're going to see the same things there. Really, how do I say how this? Okay, so this is where it gets a little tricky. I understand all the consternation, and I understand sort of the fear, and I understand and I don't excuse the rhetoric or the language that Trump and others that he has empowered uses. In fact, for me, it's really sad when I see folks that fly under a Republican banner saying the like hurtful and just ugly things that I see them saying. But also what is hard is that I feel like folks want to lump every Republican that is voting for Trump under that same sort of like feel, right? And I think that is in part where some of this went wrong, is that, and I understand the desire to do that, but it is not the reality of the Republicans I know. It's not the reality of the conservatives. And I grew up in Wright County, which is the most conservative part of the state. I represented that area. I grew up in a conservative family. We talked politics. My grandfather he did not like FDR because he lived, it was the REA that brought him electric power out to his farm, and yet he didn't support FDR because he was a Republican. So that is the world that I know and have lived in my entire life. And I don't say that there aren't elements of racist a-holes in the party. I fully admit, but that is not the Republican Party, and that is not the majority of the reasons that folks went out. Over half the country of voters went out and voted for Trump. And many of them did so with a lot of hesitation and a lot of concern. And yet they looked at the other side and they looked at the last couple years and they said, I cannot support that either. And I understand that you say, well, how can you make that choice? But ultimately they're deciding not on a person, but on sort of a value. And it's difficult to separate those, but I try to say that as a message of, just to sort of explain what's going on so that you don't think, I will tell you this, I talk to a lot of Republican congresspeople that you might, and I don't like that leadership doesn't stand up and oppose publicly more when things are said. Why would anyone defend some of the things that are saying? And I don't like that. But almost to the one, what they say to me is very much more in line with what I'm saying to you. They don't like it, they have concerns, and I believe they should stand up because I think that's what leadership is about, but also understanding, as you watch the trifecta happen in Minnesota, and that there were a lot of legislators, DFL legislators, that had concerns or wanted to pause on things or slow down things, their voices were also not heard. It happens in politics. It's not great. It's politics. It's sausage making. You can look away if you want, but that's the reality of what we are dealing with. And also, both sides have become hyper partisan, which is a real problem. Because the world in the US has become super siloed, we're even literally moving to where people think exactly like us. These districts, even without gerrymandering, we don't gerrymander in the state of Minnesota, but the seats have become hyper partisan and very blue or very red. If you look at the seat, Pete Stauber won the 8th district by over 30 points. Over 30 points. If you'd have told me 10 years ago that a Republican would win the range, I would have laughed. If you would have told me 30 points, I would have said, I don't even know what planet you're from, go away. It's what has happened is we have become so divided, and as a result, our legislators and our leaders look exactly the same. And it becomes very hard to be disparate in that. So.
Thank you so much. I mean, we're going to see some maps exactly about Minnesota and what's happening in Minnesota in a second.
Sorry.
Abu, I just want to note, as you sort of do some general remarks, these numbers were last night at 8 o'clock. So the numbers are changing in live time as well. And I also, just before you start, I just wanted to note, we'll have up here in a minute a scan code for all of you to put your phones up and scan the code. Oh, there it is, a scan code that you can submit questions. I'll try to read them up here and then ask our panelists questions as we go. And just for all of you online as well, we're able to get your questions online as well, and that link should be available to you as well. Okay, so Abu.
So first, thank you so much to MHP. Thank you for being here. I have a slightly different surprise, view of the election. And I start with the baseline numbers. So I look at 2020, what Joe Biden performed. He got approximately 81 million votes. If you take a look at what Kamala Harris is going to perform today, it looks somewhere around 69 million votes. So in other words, there's an 11 million vote drop on the Democratic side. So this idea of a red wave is a fallacy. Okay, we got to start there. But it does teach us two things. One, why were there 11 million people who voted for Joe Biden but not Kamala Harris? Point number one. And point number two, the Trump coalition is different than it was in 2016 and 2020. Predominantly, he pulled off 8 percentage points more with African Americans and Latino men. He performed extremely well with. Those are legitimate things that the Republicans can take credence of, and Democrats have to learn from. So that's the national framework, right? I think we have to think about that before we get down to how does that break down in Minnesota and what are the implications there. So I think some of the salient issues in the national election were twofold. Kamala Harris was being squeezed both on the right, and by right I mean kind of the middle, and on the extreme left. In the middle, she was being squeezed on culture. Democrats, I understand our values and what we stand for, but oftentimes we articulate issues that are for 5% or 10% of the population that alienates or turns off a large swath of the population. And so on a variety of culture issues, you might have seen a TV ad attacking Kamala Harris for supporting gender transition in prisons when she was Attorney General of the state of Minnesota, the Attorney General of California. That ad, whether we like it or not, was extremely effective in moving oftentimes labor centrist, pretty much Democratic voters away from the Democratic coalition. And then on the far left, she was being squeezed on the war in the Middle East. And so if you add up those factors, in addition to the never Trump vote of 2020, that some of them went back home to Donald Trump. That is why you saw this erosion with the Democratic base. Again, this was not a red wave election. It's not. Donald Trump won the popular vote, but he didn't even perform better than Joe Biden in 2020. And we have more voters today than we did 4 years ago. So I think it's an important thing to frame up there. So now what does that mean coming home? I do think it means Democrats have to calibrate how we think about things. There is a solution in the middle, particularly in this issue, and do we want to pause here or get into that, or how'd you like me to proceed? Because I did the national, but I think...
Well, so let's just talk about that. Let's come back. Let's come back to this. So I had a couple... I want to start with you, Abu, actually, about what you've just said. Is this on? I want to start with you about what you've just said about it's not a red wave. I took this from the New York Times. They have some great mapping on their website. And this is talking about what districts are trending red based over from the previous 2020 election. And which ones are not. And this is Minnesota. I just did that pieced out of the United States. I think there's 1 or 2 blue arrows in the along the North Shore there, but otherwise it's trending. So tell me more about that red wave.
That's what I mean. When I say, if you look at this map, you'd think, oh my God, all these Bernie people voted for Trump. The data does not bear this out. This statistic does not bear this out because it's comparing to a baseline that was much higher. In 2020, 81 million people voted for Joe Biden. This election, 69 million people are going to vote for Kamala Harris. We have to understand that baseline. There is a drop, fundamental drop in voter turnout. And in fact, in Minnesota, voter turnout was down this election compared to 2020. And this is a high turnout state. So if you don't begin with that fundamental understanding, you may take results from this election that are actually skewed. You may think, wow, there's a lot more. There's millions and millions of more Trump voters than there are Democratic voters. That is not the case, but there are more voters who are turned off by culture wars, oftentimes that can be to the benefit of Democrats like abortion, but can be to the detriment of Democrats. And I think you saw some of those effectively articulated by Donald Trump in his campaign to alienate some voters with Kamala Harris.
I've also just put up the election results in Minnesota for the presidential turnout, or results rather, and just noting sort of the blue and red. Obviously, is it 2/3 of the population that lives in the Twin Cities metro, area? But I think it's also notable in terms of how this map is going. And I'll just note before we leave the federal level that this map is Klobuchar's. So the US Senate race, where it's interesting that, and tell me what you think what's going on here, where Klobuchar continues to have strong support in the regional economic hubs, but there's a lot of flipped districts there as well.
So that, and I haven't said there's a red wave. I've said there's a red shift. And that is what we were seeing, and this demonstrates it perfectly. Why is Amy Klobuchar able to still capture areas that were traditionally blue versus what other DFL or Democrat candidates are getting here in Minnesota and across the country? And this is why. And Amy runs hard, like she does great constituent services. She runs a fairly like moderate or center left program. And also I will say she ran against a really unacceptable candidate. We cannot leave that off the table. I know hyper-partisan Republican staffers for US Congress people that told me they ran, not walked, to vote for Amy Klobuchar in this race. So that can also not be missed. But in large, but there is, while it's not a red wave, there has been a red shift. And that's what should be aware. Despite the fact, and I would say, beware the red shift, because if it's shifted under a man who says the awful things that Donald Trump says, who like has the rhetoric and the background and January 6th and all of those things that give like the Nikki Haley voters and and not even moderate Republicans. I'm a conservative Republican, and he gives me just like complete pause and anger when I watch him speak sometimes. But if despite that, we're saying, I still can't vote for the Democrats, that's a real problem. Nikki Haley, if she'd have been on the ballot, would have run away with this race because of this red shift, would have been a much bigger red wave. And that's the reality.
So let's shift now to the state results. This map is a map of the Minnesota House of Representatives from this election. Some of those I think had not yet come in. The results had not yet come in by the time I did this map. We're living in real time here as results are coming in. So we are in an interesting moment right now as races. There's still a number of races that are yet to be resolved. Let's talk about the House of Representatives first. Abu, I'll start with you. The House of Representatives, and what are we facing? Jennifer Ho, our commissioner, had referenced 1979 and a split House with no clear majority. What are we looking at broadly within the State House?
Yeah, so right now, and I was looking at data this morning at 6:30, right now, I think we will have a tie. We will have a 68-68 House of Representatives. Why?
67,
I'm sorry, 67-67. Why we would have an even numbered House, I will never understand. But nonetheless, we will have a 67-67 House. And Amy will get into this later about, this has happened once in modern history. I do think, first, if we have a tie, that ultimately is going to have to be negotiated by the leadership of both parties. I would say, I think the Speaker, I know her well, I've worked with her, she is phenomenal, and I actually think the House Minority Leader, Lisa Damith, is a talented, smart, pragmatic person. So I think in the lexicon of like violence that could happen in the next like 60 days or fighting, I think they're gonna be more on the side of actually kind of trying to set up the House. So what does that potentially look like? In my view, it potentially means something like the Speaker being of one party, or the Majority Leader being of a different party, or key committees. I would look at taxes, for example. I would look at Ways and Means, for example, possibly commerce, as some areas where you begin to divide which party controls that portion of the budget. I know, that's gonna be interesting. So that's what it kind of looks like to me. And then potentially look out for, special elections, things throughout the year that could happen, a potential resignation. I mean, things like that as they go on the House side could make an impact on what this number looks like. Are we talking about Senate later?
why don't we talk about, you know, feel free.
Okay, and then the one other thing I wanted to add is where Democrats lost, again, ties into the point that I made at the beginning. You know, my theory of the House campaign coming in was we would lose 2 seats, but we would maintain the majority. So at the time, Republicans needed to take 4 seats to take the majority. I thought we would lose 2, but we would net 2, and so therefore we would maintain the majority. We lost 2 seats, and 1 in St. Peter and 1 in Winona. That surprised me. Amy will very much take credit for that. But I will
watch
take
the
credit for
tape back.
2020.
He was
But I will
like,
take
it's
credit for
absolutely
2020.
not going
I didn't say
Republican.
absolutely.
I said,
I didn't
it
say
absolutely is
I said I
going
think we're going to win by
Republican.
about 200 votes. I mean, it was close. But you were right. I was wrong on those 2 seats. And the reason I was wrong is because I believed that at least 80% of the Democratic coalition from 2020 would show up. And when you look at the base constituencies that the Democratic Party needed to win, young people, suburban women, African Americans, on the young people factor, we have Winona State University, which is kind of the heart of that district. The turnout score was down from 2020. So I wasn't projecting that there'd be all these new voters for Kamala and the vibes are good, a new way forward. No, that wasn't the analysis. The analysis was it's going to be slightly down, and I'm still anticipating because of those college kids. Turns out their turnout was even worse than what I projected. And that's why we lost that seat. But it was only in the grand scheme of things, about 1,300, maybe Amy will tell me if I'm wrong.
They were pretty big wins.
1,300 votes. I mean, if you think about that, that's really like 300 per precinct. I mean, it's not a huge number in the grand scheme of an election. But nonetheless, I think it's something that the Republicans can take credit for. And second is the St. Peter seat. St. Peter is basically the home of Tim Walz. My theory of the campaign was Tim Walz is on the ballot, they're going to show up like gangbusters. That did not happen. And that is a seat, I think, as Democrats, we have to think through what is our 87 county strategy. We can't just be winning in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and think we're going to be able to govern in St. Paul. So how do we temperamentally and on policy have a broad appeal to people, speak to, yes, the middle? How do we reach those voters? And how do we understand their daily lives? And I think we have failed at that, and we've got to get better at that. So part of what I hope we do as part of this political autopsy that I think many of us are going through is how do we speak to Minnesota? And what is our brand in Minnesota? Because a lot of people are not following every single little policy detail like we do. A lot of people, it's a first impression. What is the vibe I'm getting? Are you temperamentally pragmatic? Do you come across as someone that is reasonable? And some of the Democrats at times don't come across that way. And I think that has been off-putting to some voters in greater Minnesota. And so I'll end there to say I think that's one thing Democrats need to, as part of this autopsy, think about.
So Amy, briefly talk about the fact that, you know, we have 2 seats that are in recount, one with 14 vote difference and 13 vote difference, and one with a 28 vote difference. We are certainly a divided state, and really about governance. What does this all mean about governance? And again, I encourage and invite all of you to submit questions as well. So let's talk about that, and then I want to move more specifically to housing. We need more housing, and what is this going to mean for a bipartisan housing solution? Yeah.
So the 2 seats, right, it's a DFLer, Dan Wolgamott in St. Cloud against Sue Eck, and a DFLer, Brad Tabke in Shakopee. That's the 13 seat. So currently the DFLers are holds on both those seats. So those are not pickups for the DFL. They're just holds if they hold their tiny leads. I believe they probably will. History tells us that these recounts generally yield a few votes over here and a few votes over there for both sides, and it's kind of a wash. It might move a little bit. But however, the tie is in if the DFL holds those. So the outcome of these recounts do not affect, there's no upside for the DFL. You're at hold or you're at minority. The only upside is for the Republicans. If they pick up either of those seats, they're now in the majority. That's it. There's the upside is belongs to the Republicans. But let's say the tie stays, which I believe it will. Of the 201 legislators in St. Paul, going to St. Paul, 101 are Democrats and 100 are Republicans. It is not just the House that is tied. If the Senate could be tied, it would be tied. And there is the issue of the Senator Nicole Mitchell in Woodbury, who's going up on, she caught felony burglary charges and she's going up to court in January. So that's a DFL seat. And so if something happens there where she is, or she steps down or is forced to step down because of those charges, the Senate will be at 33-33. And there is no provision in the U.S. Constitution for ties. I don't know what we were thinking there. I'm not sure. And also the Constitution does not allow for like a co-speakership. They have to decide. Minnesotans are voting for balance and cooperation. That's what they're trying to say to the legislature. And what we saw in the last 3 years, and you can love it or you can hate it. And to be honest, I love some of it, and I didn't care for some of it. That's where I was at with it. So I'm sort of divided on that, right? But in 2023, when the trifecta went into place, massive reforms and changes that had been kind of waiting took place. And I get it. And actually, as a political scientist, both I'm excited about this divide. I'm terrified by it, but I'm also excited about just to watch how it's going to work. But also, I appreciated the game in 2023. I was like, whew, you are moving in and you are getting your agenda through. And then in 2024, there was more push and so little cooperation, I was stunned. You needed bipartisan support on some big bills that were pushing through the legislature. You needed bipartisan support on a bonding bill. If you want capital investment to go, our founders said you need a super majority, not a super majority. You need a 2/3 vote to pass any capital investment bill. And so those bills, by their very nature, no one has those kind of numbers in the House. Not the DFL didn't have it in the House. They didn't have it in the Senate. They needed Republicans, and they knew that going into this session. They also knew that the entire House and one of the Senate seats was going to be up for re-election. Why would you not moderate your stances, take the bills that could be passed in a bipartisan, smart way, and work with Republicans to get them passed? And then you add on, by about 4 weeks before the end of session, you had this cat burglar situation in Woodbury happen. And so you know what Republicans said? They said, you're 34-33. You don't have a mandate. And now you're going to have this person come in and vote and be the deciding vote on all these big bills that you want to push through, that you've not taken an amendment from us. You've not listened to us. We basically are superfluous in committee. And you want to come in and we're going to go through this kabuki theater of a 34-33 vote, and we're going to pretend like, these are all okay. Republicans weren't even asking for a lot. I talked to a bunch of them. I was like, those are the saddest asks I've ever heard. You should ask for more.
But
it's important to understand this because people want to say so you ramrod it in the final days and final hour of session. A bill was put before the legislature that was 1,400 pages, that had Senate files, had 10 or 12 different Senate files and House files jammed into it. They literally didn't vote on this in committee. They brought in and wrote on a piece of paper the Senate files and House files is important.
We know
but why it was such a mess and why it was unprecedented, folks, because everybody wants to say the mess is always at the end of session. There is. This was I've never seen anything like it. And so Minnesotans just went, ugh, we cannot have it. And this divide is going to be an important lesson for all those legislators.
So the bottom line right now, thank you, is that we got a lot of energy in this room. The bottom line is that we have a Senate that is 33-34, and we have a House that is 67-67. And if it changes slightly, it's still each way. We are truly divided. Minnesota, I think, has truly come into being a purple state, not a blue state that had been sort of its history. So I think it's a moment. So let's talk about governance, and specifically, the folks in this room care about housing. Housing is clearly been a bipartisan issue. I'll make a little plug right now. One of our key wins several years back was creating the state housing tax credit. By the way, you all can benefit if you have any tax liability yourselves, personally or through other entities you're engaged with, to contribute and get a tax credit from the state against your taxes. That was done. That was led by a Republican state senator, Carla Nelson. We know that housing is bipartisan. Last year, the Abundant Housing Coalition's work on land use reforms to try to remove these exclusionary barriers and reduce the time and cost to create actual housing was passed out of committee and unanimously by Republicans and Democrats. So there's a path. The question is about governance. So Abu, talk a little bit briefly, and we have one more question before we end up, but talk briefly about how do we literally advance? We need more housing. We've got a supply and demand mindset. We need to work with the market, and we need to invest to keep it affordable. How do we do that in this environment?
Yeah, so to me, I actually think, with great challenges comes great opportunities. I think we need to start thinking about housing the way agriculture talks about the Farm Bill. So for those that are not aware, the Farm Bill historically came through the lens of kind of like very lefty farmers coming together in a coalition with advocates for food stamps, essentially. And they originally were divided. But what they did is decided that the Farm Bill was going to be the vehicle for multiple coalitions so that they had the resources on both ends, but also they had the regulatory infrastructure so that it wasn't overly burdensome for producers and others. I think that's the model for housing. I think you can pull together advocates on the quote unquote far left who very much care about housing for people, bring in developers and others in the middle to talk about how do you build up supply, but also how do you create a regulatory environment and how do you provide the tax incentives and the foundation that then that's the collective vehicle, right? I think that's the way we need to start thinking about housing, because if you're looking in isolation to say, we need more homes, we need more money, but you're actually not concerned or thinking about what it takes to make that economically viable, I don't think we're as serious about it as we say we are. So start thinking about what does that vehicle look like, because the vehicle is how you ultimately build the political coalition. That's the way I think we got to think about housing.
Yep, I can do it. So here's the deal. Greater Minnesota and small towns in greater Minnesota look a lot like urban areas in Minneapolis and St. Paul. That's the reality, and that's also been kind of part of this push, right? And so just recognizing that, whether it's food deserts, childcare, and housing, the issues are very, very similar. And working together with that, with legislators, and just like expressing and acknowledging that reality goes a long way to pushing this. Whether it's housing or childcare, those things are desperate need across the state of Minnesota, and Republicans know it, and they are looking for solutions. So get them solutions. And I almost wanted to keep saying amen when Commissioner Ho was up here. I know it was almost a revival, but like what you were saying was dead on accurate. Like these issues have Republicans recognize it, and they want solutions. Now the solutions might not be $3 billion, but we're not going to have $3 billion. So let's be smart about how we deploy the appropriations asks that we have. Let's talk about housing. I love the housing abundance, right? That is right up Republicans' alleyway. Work with them and find and get those solutions, and whatever you need at the state legislature this year, they're going to be all on board for that. There are a lot of willing members on both sides of the aisle, but particularly because I'm the Republicans are with you on this. They know it. You just have to come with solutions that they can go, yeah, I can get on board with that. And you will be amazed at the work that we can get done this year in housing.
So let's give a huge round of applause to the panelists. I think there's more to come.
Thank you. Thanks so much for coming. So I just have closing remarks. I'd like to invite Trent Bowman up from Bremer Bank. And before we do, I just want to make one observation about the power of the voices that are in this room. So as I think we all know that when people win elections, they win elections because they got the most votes. They're not walking in as experts in housing, experts in childcare, experts in any of these big issues that they have to address. We are experts, and our job is to help inform and educate. So our elected officials are making thoughtful, informed decisions that they understand the ripple effects one way or the other. So I really call on all of you to use that voice and be partners with our elected officials, because they make really important decisions. So let's really help them make really good decisions. With that, I just want to ask Brent to make a few closing comments. Thank you.
Thank you. So with all of the stuff going on in the elections, I just want to officially announce that I will be running for president of the United States in 2028. Kate Speed will be my campaign manager. Now that I've got your attention. No, I've been a part of MHP for a number of years, and I just love the work that they are doing, from affordable housing, making sure that people in the rural area as well as the community have accessible housing. And in order for MHP to continue this work, we need help. I'm also a board member too. Might as well throw that plug in. But we need help. We need to make sure that Ann and her team can continue to do this work. So they're going to be putting up, there are several ways you can get involved. Volunteer, attend. I mean, this place is packed today. We got to continue that. We got to make sure that when MHP is doing a function or doing some type of community event, that all of us are in the room supporting the work. Because again, with all of us in this room, we support affordable housing. We support the folks that may not be able to have the same access as some of us have. So let's make sure that we're all giving and serving and making sure they have the same opportunities. So you can give, sign up to our newsletter, be involved, connect to stay up to date in events and opportunities, contribute financially. Well, we're going to ask for that. Everybody need a little bit of money, so contribute financially, because that also helps, and it helps Ann and her team do the work that they do. And finally, join us in advocacy. Bills got to get passed. And without the people in the room, and then share with other friends, share with other family members, because I'll just take a wild guess. Each and every one of us have a family member that may need assistance, that may need a little help in affordable housing, that may need just that little bit of push. And we can all sit in these chairs and we can all say, yeah, but it's time to reach out to them. These next 3 to 4 years are gonna be incredible. Again, I'm not a politician, but we got a split house. But us in the room, we may be divided, but we gotta come together. The rhetoric has to end, because if it doesn't end, we're going to continue to be divided. And guess what? When we have rhetoric and we're pointing fingers at each other, guess what happens? Nothing. So let's get it together. Let's build this, and let's have some fun, but let's make a change. Thank you.
Thanks for coming, everybody. That concludes our program. We don't want to bring any of that food to anybody's offices, so please take it with you, and we look forward to working with you over this next session. And the flowers. Please take your fall flowers on the table.